Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 151. And this episode, we are talking about goals and end games within all of the little processes of games and whether they are meant to create organization and order or whether the whole point is to just burn it to the ground. Order versus chaos, I suppose, is how we can call it.
Yeah, this idea I think was born from, and correct me if I'm wrong, Geoff, the idea that there are a lot of organization games that have come out, especially in the last few years. We'll throw out some names here and then probably go deeper, but like Power Wash Simulator, Unpacking. Pretty much every Resident Evil game has inventory management of some kind where you are literally doing Tetris with your weapons. And like this idea that some games can really focus on cleaning up or organizing or betterment, and then other games, I guess, throw out any horror or action game here, can be just completely born of chaos and nonsense and disorder. And this idea that you can find satisfying things in both. I mean, Geoff and I have talked about life simulators on this podcast before. And I think the whole of life sims, like, I forget who it was. It might have been Sarah, who had said that, like, why would I want to play chores the game? And if I'm misattributing that, the person who did say that quote, I apologize. But I thought it was when we were talking about Animal Crossing, like, why would I want to play chores the game? Because it's true. Animal Crossing mostly is you get up, you garden, you build a thing, you organize a thing. And it's like, I have to do that in real life. Why would I want to do that in a game?
You can be certain of the outcome, if nothing else, in the game.
True. And so, like, I think this is an exploration of why we play those kinds of games and kind of the purpose they serve. Because 20 years ago, I mean, I guess you could call Tetris an organizing game because you are organizing the blocks in order.
I mean, honestly, that's sort of where this started. I mean, there is a bit of talking about games that are a little more about organization, but really one of the cruxes for me, and I did not tell you this, is solitaire. Solitaire is very much an OG kind of organization game because the way I think about this is in terms of games are about goals. Sometimes the goals are aimless, but very often you think of adventure games, you think of RPGs, you think of platformers or any of the other more classic games where it is reaching a goal. It is checking things off of a list. You can obfuscate it one way or another. You can put in all kinds of different gameplay, and you should. But at the end of everything, the point with the game is whatever the point of the game is. In Monopoly, it's have all the money or make sure no one else is able to have any money. In Mario, it is reach the end of the final level. There's story things, but it's just reach the end of the final level, reach this point. There are other ones where, yeah, it is about things ending up in a state where it's all together one way or another. And you're absolutely right. From this definition, certainly for me, Tetris is an order game. A lot of puzzle games are order games where you aren't just necessarily, yes, you can say you're checking things off of a list, but it is reaching a peaceful state, a balanced state. It is patience games where you're clearing the board. It is all the Sokoban games where you push the blocks so they end up in a certain spot. And games where the idea is destroy everything. You know, it's not reach this point, it's nothing on the board. When I was thinking about this, I realized that the notion of where I think of chaos games or chaos goals has become much stronger with the advent of physics engines.
Sure.
I would call something like, whereas Mahjong would be an order game, even though you're clearing the board, Angry Birds is a chaos game. You go about it however you want, and you are utilizing the medium not in a, this goes here, this does this. It's, I'm a hit that spot and hopefully collapse everything. Rampage is a chaos game.
Yeah.
That kind of idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first one I thought of is Rampage, because the goal is to smash the other monsters, but also the goal is to smash the people in the buildings. And there were later Rampage games where they were in 3D, or you think of, like, we've talked about on the show many times, Hulk Ultimate Destruction and Godzilla Destroy All Monsters, both games where there is sort of a purpose, but mostly you just want to smash everything.
Yes.
I think of King of Monsters 1 and 2, which were favorites of mine on the Sega Genesis, where, again, you're meant to be smashing the other monster, but also you get bonuses for smashing the buildings. You get power-ups for smashing the buildings. It's all about the destruction of things. And yeah, I don't know that I have a preference towards one or the other. I think it's the game mechanic that really hooks me. It's funny. I am very satisfied by cleaning things, as lazy as I can be sometimes, like doing the dishes, cleaning pans and pots and stuff, like I tend to drag my feet to start the job, but once I start doing it, there's a satisfaction to finishing it.
And very meditative in the process.
Right. And of course, it's also prime podcast listening time. During the pandemic, often because we weren't going out at all, my downtime was really only when I was doing the dishes or if I was doing the laundry. And so I would listen to podcasts during that time. But there was a satisfaction to getting things clean and getting things organized, folded, put away. And so I honestly haven't played a lot of organization games. I've played a few. I've played a demo of Power Wash Simulator, but I've never actually dived deep in it. I did play, I think, the first hour or two of Unpacking. The problem with Unpacking for me is, as someone who is a little inattentive when it comes to how things get put away, because Unpacking has a right. You can turn this off, but I wanted to play the game as is. But the base game has a requirement, like certain things have to go in certain places. You can't just put anything anywhere. There is an option in the options menu where you can turn that off and then just put anything anywhere and you're done. But because there was a narrative to the person you were playing as, for every house you moved and every place you went to, I wanted to do it the way the game wanted. But sometimes, like, there was a refrigerator one where you were putting stuff in the fridge and in the kitchen, and I was putting things in places that made sense to me, and the game was like, nope, that's wrong. I was like, but it's not wrong. That's where that goes. In my kitchen, it goes there. And so, like, I found with some organization games that maybe because I'm a little more chaotic or I'm a little more avant-garde, as it were, I rub up against what an organizing game considers organization as the rules get more complicated.
Well, and that's its own sort of, there are games where, there is no set goal because you do it to your specifications. These things go in the kitchen because of the way you put them in your kitchen, Matt, or I might put them in mine. Or the living room, depending upon, we live in apartments and sometimes things have to be multifunctional. But I also think of a friend of mine who works as a professional organizer. And so, one, I try not to ask her too often, like, where should I put this? What should I be doing here? Because I appreciate people shouldn't have to feel like they're working when they're not on the clock. If people want to do things on their own time, that's here or there. But this is interesting because, thinking of her, Unpacking, it is a little bit like, yes, you are organizing, yes, you are using that, but you also, in a sense, have a client. It's those games where you are playing the field as much as you're playing yourself. And so that is its own form of order, and that is a little bit of, certainly for me, where I can get a lot of analysis paralysis over what I should be doing, where I should be putting something, how things are supposed to go, to have even a little bit or more of an external force that says, no, I don't like putting books there. I'd prefer if they were there. Great, I've got a little bit of an anchor point here to pivot on. And then go, okay, so books go here. And I'm learning your rules a little bit more. It thus makes it even more satisfying when, by the next stage, by the next go-round on it, I know exactly where everything goes. There is that satisfaction, which kind of goes hand in hand with, like, what Sarah may have said, and I'm going to go with what Sarah said, of why would I want to play Chores the game? I also think of the joke about Dungeons & Dragons, where Dungeons & Dragons is the ultimate fantasy. Feeling fully rested after sleeping for 8 hours, or even getting 8 hours of sleep, as that is. And so those times where, I can organize something, a little chime plays, and I'm done. I don't have to do this chore again unless I want to do this chore again. You can feel that there is something that says you have completed this task to satisfactory conditions, to perfection, to whatever it is, and you get that little bit of feedback, which is very funny because one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this topic and get at this is because that feeling is oddly similar to the feeling you get when you complete chaotic conditions and chaotic goals. Right. Sometimes an order game or a chaos game or mini game or goal or gameplay loop or whatever, because larger games can contain both. When you get to that end point, sometimes it means nothing's left, nothing's there. You've put everything away or you've destroyed everything. And both carry with them a almost sigh of relief with confirmation that, yeah, you completed that goal. How awesome is that?
Yeah, totally. I think also, so Unpacking, long story short, I ended up abandoning because I rubbed up against that specific requirement. And I found with games like this, I played Potion Permit quite a bit on the Switch last year. I think that was last year. It's hard to remember. But then also bounced off because with Life Sims for me, the minute the requests become slightly more complicated than I am willing to do to figure out, I go, I think I'm good. Because I think I hit up against that, this is starting to feel like chores the game, right?
Gotcha.
Like, and it could be that some games do it better. There's a game I'm going to talk about a little later that kind of merges chaos and organization in a really good way that came out this year. But like, I think for me, the problem is I like both types of gameplay, but I think the game has to really have me invested. It's why I've never finished a playthrough of Stardew Valley. Not that you really finish that game, but there is a crux of the narrative-ish. I've gotten pretty far in it playing with several people co-op, but playing by myself, I just go, I don't know what to do. And like the game in that respect, like when from farming and that kind of thing, lets you kind of do whatever you want. But there are seasons, there are things that sell more at certain parts of the year. There's certain characters you should talk to. When friend of the show, Katie Bug, aka Katie Beast on Twitter, when we were playing co-op together every other week or so, like she would kind of guide me and be like, go do this and then go do that and I'll do this. And that's all I need in a game like that is someone to tell me what to do.
Right.
But the minute it's kind of open-ended and I'm like, well, you could do whatever you want. Like my order versus chaos brain, I think goes, well, I don't know. I could do anything, so I don't want to do anything.
Right. And it's interesting to explore what that impulse is, whether for you or I, Matt, or for anybody listening. Where does the amount of direction, guidance, conditions cause you to go, okay, this is great and I'm going to do this, or screw it, I need it all to burn one way or another. And it's very funny to me that also games that engender the chaos impulse are often animal-based.
Yeah.
Because while Untitled Goose Game is literally checking things off of a checklist, I don't think I'd be the first one to make an argument that it is a game entirely about chaos.
Yes. And one of my favorites because it's so short. Because you can get through it in a couple of hours, you can do that checklist, but then you can also just spend an hour completely messing with people accomplishing absolutely nothing.
Yes, and I think there too comes with the intention of what the goal is. When you're doing an organizational game, you're playing as usually a human of some kind. And so there is that kind of like, put these things away, make these things work, put these things in their place. You're either playing as a person or you're playing as sort of a non-entity in the case of puzzle games, perhaps.
Yeah.
Whereas chaos, you're usually some kind of an animal, whether it is being a goose or something like Goat Simulator, as well as any games where you're playing as a cat.
Yes.
I'm thinking of a fun cross-section of this is the fact that there's also a puzzle game called A Little to the Left that's very much not only about putting things away, but putting things in very pleasing arrangements where little notches here, this is exactly where this is supposed to go. So you don't necessarily have somebody telling you, but you have the environment telling you. But there's also a cat that's trying to mess with things.
Right.
As sort of the pivot point to cat lateral damage, where it's a first-person, I'm a cat, screw everything game, which is absolutely chaos.
Well, sure. And like for me, like when I played Stray, like I liked Stray. I thought more or less it was a good game. I didn't think it was as great as everyone else thought it was, just because I think ultimately it's an exploration game, and because there's no dialogue or there's minimal dialogue since the cat can't talk, you know, it didn't hit me as much as it hit other people. But one thing I love doing in that game is every time it gave me an opportunity to interact with something, to mess with it. There's a moment very early in the game where a painter is trying to paint and moving paints around, and you can absolutely walk up to the paint can and just knock it over for no reason, and then it falls on someone and makes a mess. And I think the chaos games are a lot more based in instinct and like, can I do this? Oh, I can. Great. Let's fuck it up.
I mean, even more than instinct, impulse.
Oh, impulse. Yeah, sure.
It's like, what if? Can I?
It's funny. I'm looking up games with destructible environments, you know, and one of the ones that's a favorite of mine, it's the first episode of Side Quests, I love it so much, was Control. Control was a game where you could use levitation to like throw objects, but everything is destructible in those environments because not only can they be destroyed by the enemies and you, but when you use levitate, unless you're aiming for something very specific, you rip chunks of the floor out and throw it. And it's very satisfying to do stuff like that. We hinted at Hulk Ultimate Destruction earlier, like the idea that you can grab a car, rip it in half, punch them together, and now you've got boxing gloves, or like you can jump from building to building, you leave these giant handprints in them. All of that stuff is really satisfying because we like breaking stuff. Like nobody likes to break something that's valuable to them, but it's why like rage rooms exist as a thing where you could just go and smash stuff for an hour.
Yeah.
Is because it is satisfying on an emotional level, on an impulsive level, to just break things. And so games that let us do that and create kind of a cacophony of chaos is satisfying in a very different way than organization is satisfying.
Yeah, and especially where there are plenty of games that have rules, that have organization, especially multiplayer games where people grief and troll. And that's their chaos game, but not necessarily one that anyone else enjoys being a part of it. To touch on that briefly. But it's the thing, too, where much like a lot of other senses of scale within games these days, there's sort of the games where it's very purely this or purely that, or a mix or a mashup or anything else, whether genres or experiences. And so looking at these as sort of fundamental ideas or satisfactions or what have you, it's interesting to see where games use them largely or in just a little bit. I was talking about this concept with my Sarah before we recorded, and she immediately goes, so Legend of Zelda is both? It's like,
yeah.
In moments, yeah. The idea of much like you were talking about with control and levitation, currently in Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the ability to traverse solutions however it takes to get to the end point, there's a little bit of argument of, like I said, that is still just checking things off of a list. So I wouldn't call it a chaos game, but it is utilizing kind of that idea from chaos or chaotic things where it doesn't have to be this in its proper place so much as get here however you want. Control, fuse things together. What do they do? Let's experiment and find out. Chaos also encourages that kind of experimentation of what is this plus this.
For sure. I mean, another genre I think that does them both really well, you look at racing games, right? You think about Gran Turismo, you think about Forza. For the most part, those are about getting through races, looking slick, following the rules, threading the needle. And then you look at a game like Burnout or Burnout Paradise, where the entire point of the game is to wreck in the best and coolest ways, see cars flip, see them from different angles. And like Twisted Metal is a franchise, is like, what if cars but smash and blow up?
Yes. High explosives.
Right. And I think that's interesting also because like the earliest racing games, you were penalized for crashing. I think about like Road Rash and stuff on the Nintendo. Like you were mostly punished for going out of bounds or smashing into something.
Yeah.
And you would reset. RC Pro-Am also, you're going in circles, but the minute you bump into somebody, you get damaged or you lose momentum. Whereas there are tons of games now where even later Need for Speed games, like some of them were just about the races and some of them were about wrecking stuff and making a mess. And I think it's kind of cool that one concept kind of grew out of another in that way, right? Like early video game rules, you got to do it this one way. You have to be organized in this one way to race this way. And then as more different kinds of games, I mean, you think about Carmageddon, which I don't think has had an entry since the 90s, but like that game also, I remember playing it on PC and it's like, oh, so the point is to just destroy other cars? Sweet. I think that these, like we knew that this was a yin and yang kind of concept, but the idea that developmentally the one hand washes the other and can grow out of the other one way or the other. I mean, you look at even Tetris. Tetris was only about organization. And then as the franchise grew, I mean, there's Tetris Blast. There was all these different Tetris games where there were more interesting mechanics added, or even Tetris Effect, which I loved. Like, it's so bombastic, it doesn't even necessarily feel like an organization game anymore in the way that the original Tetris was.
And yet at its core, it still is.
Right.
And that's something where, the way we've been talking about it, and I would imagine the way most folks would instinctively think about this is, order games are cozier. Even puzzle games, just kind of really nice, really zen, really meditative to like put this here, make this happen. Tetris is, and always at its core, if it's Tetris, it is an order game because you are putting these things together, you put the lines together to clear them out. How they go about doing that and how much they spike your blood pressure to do it is immaterial to its truth, to its core as an order game. And you're absolutely right that a lot of racing games kind of have that same sort of dichotomy. And you talking about it made me realize that there's kind of two general ideas on even shoot 'em up games where you are fighting against these ideas. Because I would consider most bullet hell shoot 'em up games to be at their core order games. Because yes, you're shooting, yes, you're causing destruction. It's not about whether or not you're destroying things. Tetris, you're technically destroying those blocks. Or you could argue that you are. But you're clearing them. You're clearing the screen in a shoot 'em up game, but The patterns are meant to be consistent because in order to have that much everything on screen, you need to be able to recognize those patterns and work within them and work around them. And so while they are chaotic, while they are loud, while they are a sensory overload smorgasbord, that is ordered gameplay or order gameplay or anything like that. And then you use the super laser.
Sure. I mean, I think the best example of that is actually Ikaruga. For those who haven't played, Ikaruga is this top-down shoot-'em-up game where the basic mechanic is you have two different colors, dark black and a bright white, and you switch between them to absorb and do types of damage based on what the enemies are also using. And so, like, if they're firing black bullets, you can switch to the black and absorb them, but also they can only be damaged by the white bullets. And so you have to, like, switch back and forth. I never really got very far in it, but what I've played of it, I think I had it on the game, rented it on the GameCube. Like, it does feel like complete chaos until you hit like a Zen moment where you kind of can see the matrix code, as it were, and follow the patterns.
Yes.
And then it becomes very much this order game that you're talking about, where you're matching to protect while switching to do damage.
And Ikaruga is a great example also because that is a game that has baked into it, you never have to fire a shot to complete the game.
Right.
You can get extra points, you can increase rank, do whatever if you want to destroy other ships around you. But yeah, once you start recognizing, oh, when I match, it almost becomes part of the background and I look for the outliers in those pieces. The bosses are all on a timer. You have 100 seconds to destroy them. If you don't, they just leave. And so you get to the rank, I believe it's called Bullet Eater or Dot Eater or something like that, if you never fire a single shot throughout the entire level, throughout the entire stage. So yeah, it really is a matter of learn your shade switching, color switching, whatever you want to think of it as, and make your way through the environment. And yeah, that is absolutely extremely ordered playing amidst what looks to be chaos.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately there's a lot more of one and the other for these kinds of games. I mean, we haven't talked about probably the biggest and most famous version of both order and chaos, which is Minecraft. I mean, you think about Minecraft is designed at its core to let you build and do whatever you want. But at its core, to build and do whatever you want, you also have to destroy things, trees, rocks, animals, whatever.
Right.
And some people build incredible towns, make lovely lives, and other people build up the tallest thing they can make and then blow it all up.
Yep.
Right? And also within that, the narrative of the game also supports both. You have the creepers who can blow stuff up, but you also have the Endermen who are more organized. They steal specific blocks. And then the whole purpose of that game is to eventually kill the Ender Dragon, unless they've added more narrative for it beyond that. But that's the original game. That was the through line. But I often played that game to build up these incredible spaces, and it was very organizational. And then I had other friends who were like, no, we just want to see what we can make and then how we can blow it up in the most glorious way possible. And like the thing about a game like Minecraft and other games like it is that it gives you that freedom to do both. And then it leans on your nature, not the nature of the game, to discover what you want to do.
Right, which is why I would argue that it truly is neither.
Yeah.
Like an open sandbox game. This also sort of ties into the conversation we had a few episodes ago about emergent gameplay.
Yes.
When I certainly first broaching this topic of order versus chaos in gameplay, it is in design intent. And so something like Minecraft, actually, Matt, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about this sort of being like a yin and yang, being this balanced idea. pH is 7 in Minecraft. It is both, because it truly is more of a reflection than of a goal. And this also speaks to the fact that you can have seemingly disparate ideas like that in the same place because it really is about a goal and about the satisfaction you feel from completing it. You sometimes play games that feel like chores and are very much about order because you want to feel like you can do that and you can get there. And sometimes you want to play things that are utterly destructive and you want to break and burn and knock over, whether it's destroying entire cities or just knocking the glass off of the table. All of these are about satisfaction and feeling control and feeling all of that. And yeah, Minecraft and many other building games and open sandbox games scratch that itch however people want to go about it. And so, yeah, you create this kind of interesting, what is it, order? Is it chaos? Yep.
Yeah. It goes back to your Tears of the Kingdom analogy, right? Also, that game is kind of neither because it can be both, right? Like the puzzles are very much about the organization, but also those same puzzles you can absolutely break by removing yourself from the system and doing something more chaotically, as I've said before.
Right.
I think good organization games also let you be chaotic. I think of the game Storyteller, which I've not played the full version of, but I played the demo when it first came out. It's this game where you get tiles and you have a storybook in front of you, and there's a purpose, a narrative, and you have to make it happen using the tiles you have, like so-and-so. Like if it's about a great tragedy or the loss of a loved one, like this person falls in love with this person, then this person becomes jealous and kills this person. And you put those tiles in, it's very cartoony, and it makes the story happen. But as the game progresses, and from what I've read in reviews and other people who've played the game, those final end goals become nebulous enough that you can kind of do anything to get to them, as long as the end result, the final tile, results in that thing that the goal is. And so in this game that's about organizing a story and making a very clear narrative, there are chaotic ways in which you can do it. And I think it's interesting when we look at those kinds of setups because, again, games like Power Wash Simulator and Unpacking and games like that don't really have that, right? You could hit sections or options, but the design of those games is more too organized and too clean. But then as what we define as organization and chaos grows and games get more creative, the clear lines of what means what shifts. Like we were even talking about one's perspective on Tetris. And though Tetris at its core is always an organizational game, if you're playing Tetris Blast, I mean, things are blowing up, right? And so it's trying to understand and meet these games where they are, but bringing a little of yourself in with them.
And this is why, there's some games where I would argue they have no order or chaos inherent to them. And then there are games that are, adventure games that are in moments and in times, sweeping RPG games with all of their mini games and with all of their other things and all of their systems within systems. Some systems can be about order and some can be about chaos. And some can be Backpack Hero, where it is all inventory management as power. But those things come and go. And then there are, the times where it's, well, what is it? It's whatever you bring to it. And that's not about design intent. That simply is the tools that are there.
Yeah. Backpack Hero is one of those games that I haven't played yet, but I know Katie Lesperance of Left Behind Game Club and Cutscenes has talked about it a lot on their pods, but very satisfying. They play the demo and it's I get to just organize all the time. That's the point of the game. And it's funny that touches on a game I've been playing recently, a game called Dredge, where the broad narrative of the game is you're a fisherman who gets washed up on the shore of this small town. Your ship is destroyed. And so the mayor of the town gives you a ship that then you have to pay the debt off on. And then you continue to explore the area and make some money. And the base game is very much exploration and fishing and mini games. But all of the fish and dredge and other stuff that you fish up have certain shapes, and you have an inventory on your boat that also includes your motor, your fishing rods, your lights. And so you have to organize everything to fit in your inventory. But dare not be out after dark because you become paranoid and you start to see things, and there are things actually out there in the dark, and you can be attacked by stuff. And so it is this weird meshing of these genres in a kind of very different way. But at its core, all the fishing and the mini game progression stuff is all based in organization in this very chaotic world, which I think has been really fascinating. It was a game that I played mostly because I heard the Tales from the Backlog episode that Jill Grote, former guest of this show, and Dave Jackson, former guest of the show, talked about it. And I didn't even go past the spoiler wall because I wanted to play it for myself. And I started playing, and I was like, oh, this is fine. And then a couple days ago, I realized I can play. It's the perfect commute game because you can do individual fishing trips while on the train and then worry about narrative stuff later. And so I could build up my coffers and get more cool gear and stuff. And then I got home one day from work after having played it on the train and then played it for another 3 hours. I was like, oh no, this game has hooked me. Get it? Sorry.
Oh, dear.
And so I think when you brought up this topic, having now played it, this game I thought of a lot because this, Backpack Hero and some others, have taken the Resident Evil thing and oh, you like organizing things in your backpack, do you? Which most people didn't. Why don't we give you a game that's mostly about that? It has been really satisfying. When I get a fish shaped in an L shape and I have just that amount of space left on my boat before going back to town, it's yes, perfect. I'll grab that fish and go back.
Right. It's those moments of ordered gameplay in a sort of non-order chaos idea. A lot of story-based games aren't really. But where do these things pop up? Where are we pulling order from chaos, and where is that the point? And yeah, inventory management is a ton of that. And I do enjoy that. I actually haven't gotten to play Backpack Hero. I've only gone off of reviews and anecdotes from friends and folks. It's on my wish list. It just hasn't happened yet for me. But those times where it's, yeah, play that fantasy, play that satisfaction of everything is where it can be. Or play that fantasy on the chaos side of things where you can do whatever you want and you can play out the consequences of doing whatever you want in an enclosed space, one way or the other. There again, satisfaction, and this is basically an unconnected horseshoe.
Yeah.
Heavy order and heavy chaos are far more closely related than people realize, especially when you put them into a video game context, and which games are more purely about one or the other, or more thoroughly about that in their experience, because not necessarily the goal being order or chaos, but how you go about it. Like, I would argue that What the Gulf is a far more order-based game than people give it credit for, even though the point of it is it's taking the pre-established rules of something like golf and how you expect golf to behave and going, well, that's stupid, so we're not going to do that. But you're still putting a ball in a hole. So you're still in its way. Order and organization. I'm not trying to this isn't my grad paper. I'm not putting forth a thesis that needs to do anything. I am putting this forth because I've been having a lot of fun thinking about what I presume something to be is in a game for an ordered goal or a chaotic goal or an environment or puzzle or anything like that versus what it actually is. If I think about it for a minute. This one's meant to be a weird, high-minded concept with no real answers. More than our usual stuff, but here we are.
For sure. And I think also just an opportunity to list off some of the games we love that do these things well. I mean, we've both played both Monument Valley games, which Lauer also did incredible episodes on for side quests. And like those games are also very much about order and like solving the puzzle. But a lot of those puzzles are a very chaotic presentation. They are very MC Escher-esque, and like things in perspective as you rotate the board allow things to line up in a way where physically it would never work. And I think that story also is very much, in both games, the loose narratives are very much about finding purpose and finding order. And I think you're right, Geoff. I think while a lot of other games can have these concepts, it's puzzle games that I think do it the most. I think of Grindstone, which I've been playing on Apple Arcade a bunch, which is this match 3 game. But the crux of it is you're playing this barbarian, and the things you're matching are these little creatures to kill, and they also lead to boss fights. And so while it is a game like any other match 3 about organization and moving things around, it is very chaotic in nature because you see little bits fly everywhere as you kill these things. And I've started thinking more about a lot of the puzzle games I've played over the last few years. Even Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon is this idea of like you're playing the Shovel Knight kind of narrative, but you are fighting these enemies and trying to create, it's like any other kind of match 3 puzzle game, but it has additional elements because it is a Shovel Knight game. And I think puzzle games go from just pure organization to organization and chaos when they mix in other things, other genre types, again, Grindstone has boss battles, so it's kind of an adventure game while still just being a puzzle game. I don't mean just a puzzle game, but you know what I mean. It's like, I think as we genre mash, and I think this could be true of other games as well, it does make these concepts bleed more because individual properties and narratives and characters bring in those concepts with them. I wouldn't say that the original Shovel Knight is a chaotic game per se, but like it's an action adventure game, and action adventure games have all sorts of stuff and different things that you can do, different weapons, different items.
Very outside this argument here.
Right. But when you bring those elements into a puzzle game, they change what the organization of that puzzle game really means.
Right. And I think it's a lot easier to make ordered and orderful gameplay because you're setting a picture as a win condition, as it were. This meets this. Again, we're back to within gaming, no matter what, you have a goal and you are checking something off of a list because by the nature of games, you have to check gameplay state versus win condition. And thus having something be ordered and orderful is more easily programmed and done, which is why it works so well in puzzle games. It works so well in older games because, much like our conversation with Dave about emergent gameplay, there are nowadays more avenues to get to the same goal. And thus this allows exploration of an ordered goal versus a chaotic goal.
It's funny. I think we've gone way too long in this episode talking about organization versus chaos, and yet you, the Picross master, has not mentioned Picross once.
I mean, that is definitely a game that is absolutely about order.
Yeah.
This is that sort of thing where there are very pure puzzle ideas of nothing is falling. There's a timer. I have fun doing math to make pictures happen. I freaking love it. Unironically, I love it so much. And we've gone this far into the episode. I'll finish my thoughts on Picross here, where, yeah, no, that's absolutely one where there is little to no chaos in it. It is almost pure order.
Right.
Because it is sitting there, and even if there's no seeming thread to pull on, it's the same sort of thing of, for those who've never played Picross, it is also a lot like Sudoku. Crosswords are almost more chaotic.
Yes, I would agree.
And a word that we haven't really thrown in here, I think we might have said it a little bit, is disruptive, is disruption.
Yeah.
Disruption is neither. Disruption is agitation, is variation, is how we obfuscate these things. Because I don't think every game should be purely ordered or chaotic. No gameplay loop or mini game. Maybe those can be because they're smaller aspects within a larger game. But that's not what the goal is. My goal here is reckoning with it. And so, yeah, those Shovel Knight is a disruptive element in a block puzzle game like Pocket Dungeon. And Picross has their own disruptive elements, but I haven't really run into them in other games. Most of the time, it's just, I'm unfamiliar with these properties. Am I supposed to know who this is? But I think kind of wrapping this all together, and I haven't talked about it much because I haven't played it a ton, unfortunately, of what is open world, what is sandbox, what is ordered, what is chaotic, what is okay. The Sims.
Yeah, sure.
The Sims is very much a thing of what are the lives you're creating? How do we fuck with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think The Sims and the Sim games like SimCity and SimAnt and all of that.
Which are the ones I'm more familiar with. SimCity 2000, Sim Tower, those ones.
And then the Tycoon games, too, I think all fall into this. Like, they are dominoes, in my estimation. Very organized to set up, and then you knock them down. Now, I know people who've played these sim games and, like, just create cool stuff.
Right.
But for me, SimCity, especially on the Super Nintendo, the best part was summoning Bowser to destroy everything once I built it, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
like, and so I think like there are plenty of people who play Zoo Tycoon, Roller Coaster Tycoon, and the like to make just really cool places where people will enjoy themselves. But then there are other people who make roller coasters that have no end, so people fly off and die to get a giggle. And like The Sims is the same thing, right? There are people who want to create actual lives, watch these people live those lives and make them better. And then there are other people who let their sim go swimming in a swimming pool and then take the ladder out so they drown.
Yep.
Like it's, I kind of think the kind of poster child, which is why we waited so long to talk about it for this.
It's fair.
And I too don't have a ton of experience with these games. Most of it is secondhand from other people who played them because they weren't kind of my style besides early SimCity and some other stuff. But also even you think about Civilization as a franchise.
Oh, yeah. Any of the 4X games.
Like all of those games also is very much like when I play them with my friends, we're trying to be strategic. We're trying to work together. We're trying to broker peace and only fight when we have to. And then you could play by yourself and be like, I'm just going to kill this entire side of the map and then rebuild it in my image. The game presents you with order and logical steps. And you can go, nah, I don't want to do that, and completely go in the other direction. And I think both of these kinds of games also, whereas other games we mentioned before, because they're neither, I think these games are both, and they can be both to the extreme. It is truly based on the player because, again, most of these games you would consider more organized, less chaos, but you can be chaotic within them because the systems allow you to.
Right, and certainly the sim games that I played through, like SimCity 2000, yeah, you can build however you want, you can do whatever you want, but you still have to work within zoning laws, and you still have your poorly pixelated pictures of your city council being, you cannot cut funding, you will regret this sort of things. And, memories. And so there is that kind of yeah, you can build whatever you want, but you also can't, but you also should, but you also shouldn't. And I love being able to wrap up what are the differences between these things in like pithy little statements, whether it's true or not, it gets you along the way. And I think something with order versus chaos is something where, I've watched a lot of, sort of Puyo Pop and Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo kind of puzzle games that are very much, they're about clearing the board, but they're about knocking the other guy out.
Right.
You are using order to give them chaos. But also doing big combos within games isn't necessarily chaotic, even if it looks that way. And sort of where I'm landing here is order is setting something up and saying, watch this. And chaos is maybe setting something up, but doing an action and going, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And you can be very orderful about your chaos or chaotic about your order. Again, this is still wrapping up with each other. And there again, probably my big thesis here is they're not so different.
No, I think that's where I kind of started and where I'm not surprised, but kind of delighted that we ended up. I mean, if we go as far back as Tetris, which is kind of the origin point for a lot of this in solitaire.
Certainly for us, yeah.
Tetris, like competitive Tetris, is creating chaos for the other player, right? Every time you clear a line, they get random blocks that throw their order into chaos.
And now they have to create order out of that.
Right, with the chaos you've provided. And so I think that kind of stuff is really funny when you think about it and does really kind of lend to the thesis that we've gotten to here. Does that mean we're completely right and that this is the only logic? No, of course not.
No.
We're kind of just messing around with concepts, and we can be a little existential with our games discussion.
I like getting high-minded and highfalutin about things, and I like feeling justified in doing it. And thus, this is our show. We get to do that sometimes. And other times we just go, hey, remember Mega Man? God, Mega Man's cool.
Yeah, I gotta love that thing. I mean, the show can be both. It contains
multitudes.
Well, listener, what do you think is our most chaotic and our most ordered episodes? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. In all seriousness, though, I'm curious to hear from our listeners what kinds of games fit these molds. I mean, I know there are tons of games we haven't even mentioned, and I think what's funny and fun about this topic is you can apply it to almost any game. Does that make that game fit these descriptors? I mean, that's kind of for you to say, right?
Yeah.
There are obvious answers like unpacking, which was what we started with. But I think the greatest part about this conversation and the ensuing discussion after is that you could probably fit any game you love into this mold and explain why it fits into that mold, whether it's just a small part of that game or the entire game as a whole.
Absolutely. The idea of there are certain games that I don't know if you could ever convince me they are not an order game or not a chaos game. But what is your frame of reference? And if you think about this and if you grapple with this, where do you find yourself kind of falling? And where do you find yourself finding joy and fun and satisfaction in your gameplay loops? Is it through creating order, creating chaos? Where are your disruptors? Where are all these things? What other fun terms can we come up with together to all sound really academic as we just talk about putting blocks in places and blowing stuff up with zeros and ones? Because I love being serious about the silly and silly about the serious. So I suppose that's where we are. And we want to hear from you about all of this. And there's so many great ways to get in touch with us and to let us know. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at funandgamespod. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com to let us know what you think of this episode, previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, or who you'd like us to speak with on future episodes. And also, if you want to keep up to date on what we're doing here, as well as all the other diversifying things we're trying out and liking to do, or if you're able to and want to support us in a monetary way so that we can further create wild things, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. You don't have to donate anything to get to read articles we write or listen to these episodes from there, but we would like to shout out those that have donated and are up on the high scoreboard. And today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Roger Reichard, Alejandro Alves, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Rob Tremarco, Robert Proin, and Sean Bowen. Thank you so much. Please enter your initials. The alphabet keeps shifting around, and you might need to move the pixels in a certain way so that they all fit into the smallest space possible in order to find your letter, but they're there. Don't worry. We've sort of scattered them around, but it's all there. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it.
If you want to find all of that stuff and have already forgotten where to look, you can also look in our show notes. We have links to all our socials, to our Patreon, and a permanent invite link to our Discord server. You can also go to certainpov.com to see that invite link. Join in the conversation. Our Discord is not just for our podcast, but all the podcasts on Certain POV. There are great conversations about not just video games, but TV, movies, books, comic books, which are books. So technically I said books twice, but we're going to roll with it.
But are they ordered books or are they chaotic books?
Oh, God. But we also have tons of podcasts covering that stuff as well. If you want to have some cool conversations with some really neat folks, it's a great place to hang out.
Also, if you are so inclined to rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice, we've gotten some very lovely reviews in over the last few weeks on Apple Podcasts. I've shouted out a few, but I don't think I've shouted out Nintendo Roger. Definitely not Katie Beastie or Jala-chan. Thank you so much for the lovely reviews that you've given. We do read these, and they mean the world to us.
Yes, absolutely. And for that, also, you can go to the show notes. I have a link to Spotify as well as Apple. Also, you can go to Good Pods. I created a list based on video game podcasts and based on TV and movie podcasts. We love the folks over at Good Pods, and there's also places there where you can rate each episode and also rate and review the show as a whole. And if you are on Good Pods, we would appreciate that as well.
Yeah, if you are so inclined and have the time, we would really appreciate it because we love talking about these things and we love hearing from all of you about it, whether it is on Twitter or through messages, whether it is through the reviews that we read. We would talk about these things anyway, but we can't do this show without you because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey.
Oh, hey, Geoff.
What's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
CPOV.
certainpov.com.